Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. It was a stormy night, the kind where the rain pounded on the roof like it was trying to break in, and the wind howled through the trees. I was alone in my farmhouse, nestled in the middle of nowhere. The power had gone out an hour ago, leaving me in the dim glow of candles scattered around the living room. I was reading a book, trying to ignore the creepy sounds outside when I heard it, a knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. Who could be out here in this weather? I got up slowly, feeling uneasy, and walked to the door. When I opened it, a man stood there, drenched to the bone. He looked harmless enough, but something about him made me nervous. "My car broke down," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Can I come in and use your phone?" I hesitated. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. But I didn't want to be heartless. "Sure," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He thanked me and stepped into the hallway, water dripping from his clothes. I pointed to the phone in the kitchen. "It's over there. Help yourself." He nodded and walked in that direction, and I followed him, trying to shake off the bad feeling in my gut. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. As he talked, I noticed him glancing around, taking in the details of my house. "Thanks for letting me in," he said, hanging up the phone. "My name's David, by the way." "Emma," I replied, still feeling uneasy. "Did you get through to someone?" "Yeah, my friend will be here in about an hour," he said. "Mind if I wait here?" I didn't like the idea, but what choice did I have? "Sure, make yourself comfortable," I said, trying to sound more at ease than I felt. He sat on the couch, and I offered him a towel, which he accepted gratefully. We made small talk for a bit. He seemed normal enough, but then he started saying things that set off alarm bells. "You've got a really nice place here," he said, looking around. "I've always liked old farmhouses like this. Your family must have had it for generations." My blood ran cold. How did he know that? "Yeah," I said cautiously. "It was my grandparents." He nodded, like he already knew. "I bet it has some interesting stories," he said, his eyes locking onto mine in a way that made me feel like he could see right through me. I forced a smile. "Yeah, it does. But it's just me here now." David's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That must get lonely sometimes." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Not really," I lied. "I like the peace and quiet." He leaned back, seeming too comfortable. "You must be really brave, living out here all alone." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I stood up, needing to put some distance between us. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Coffee, tea?" "Coffee would be great," he said, his eyes following me as I moved to the kitchen. I started the coffee maker, my mind racing. I needed to get him out of here. When I turned back, he was standing in the doorway, watching me. "You've got a lot of family photos," he said, nodding toward the hallway where the pictures hung. "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. "Lots of memories." He stepped closer, and I fought the urge to back away. "It's funny," he said softly. "I feel like I know this place. Like I've been here before." My heart was pounding now. "Maybe you drove by sometime," I said, trying to sound casual. "Maybe," he said, but his smile told me he didn't believe it. "Or maybe it's just so welcoming." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, I guess so." The coffee finished brewing, and I poured him a cup, my hand shaking slightly. As I handed it to him, he grabbed my wrist. "Thanks, Emma," he said, his grip tightening. "You're really kind." I pulled my hand away, my heart racing. "You're welcome," I said, stepping back. "Your friend should be here soon." He took a sip of the coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "I hope so," he said. "I wouldn't want to overstay my welcome." I smiled, but inside I was panicking. I needed to get him out of here. "You know, the storm's letting up," I said. "Maybe you should wait outside, so you don't miss your friend." He didn't move. "It's still pretty rough out there," he said. "I'm sure you don't mind me staying a bit longer." I was running out of options. "Actually, I do," I said, trying to sound firm. "I'm really tired and need to get some sleep." He put down the coffee cup and stood up, his smile gone. "That's too bad," he said, his voice low. "I was hoping we could get to know each other better." Fear shot through me. "Please, just go," I said, my voice shaking. He took a step toward me, and I backed up until I hit the counter. "Emma, don't be like that," he said, his eyes cold. "We were just starting to have fun." I grabbed a knife from the counter, holding it between us. "Get out," I said, my voice steady now. He raised his hands, smirking. Okay. No need for that." He backed away slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. I followed him to the door, the knife still in my hand. "Go," I said again. He opened the door and stepped outside, the rain still pouring down. "I'll be seeing you, Emma," he said, his voice a chilling promise. I slammed the door and locked it, my hands trembling. I watched through the window as he walked away, disappearing into the night. I didn't sleep at all that night, too afraid he might come back. When morning finally came, I called the police and told them everything. They promised to keep an eye on the area, but I knew I wouldn't feel safe for a long time. That night changed everything. I wasn't just a farmer living in a quiet old house anymore. I was a survivor, and I would never let my guard down again. It was pouring rain, and I could barely see the road ahead. The storm was one of the worst I'd seen in years. I was driving home after a long day at work, just wanting to get back to my warm bed. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, and my knuckles were white. The windshield wipers were on full blast, but they struggled against the sheets of rain. Suddenly, my car jerked and sputtered. The engine light came on, and then the car just died. I managed to steer it to the side of the road before it completely gave out. I sat there for a minute, trying to figure out what to do. My phone was dead, of course. I had forgotten to charge it at work. I turned on the emergency flashers and got out of the car, the rain immediately soaking through my clothes. I popped the hood and stared at the engine, but I didn't know what I was looking for. I wasn't a mechanic. As I stood there, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance, coming closer. It was a tow truck. Relief washed over me. The truck pulled up behind my car, and a man got out. He was tall and bulky, wearing a raincoat and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. "Need some help?" he called out over the sound of the rain. "Yeah, my car just died," I replied, trying to sound grateful but feeling uneasy. There was something off about him that I couldn't put my finger on. He walked over and looked under the hood, then back at me. "Looks like you've got a serious problem here. I can tow you to my garage, get it fixed up." I hesitated. "Where's your garage?" "Not too far," he said, but he didn't give an exact location. "Hop in the truck, I'll get you out of this storm." I didn't have many options. The storm was getting worse, and I couldn't stay out here all night. I got into the passenger side of the tow truck, and he climbed in after me, slamming the door shut. As we drove, I noticed he wasn't taking the main roads. Instead, he turned down a narrow, winding road that I didn't recognize. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Shortcut," he said, not looking at me. "We'll be there soon." I watched the dark trees whip by, my unease growing. I tried to remember if I'd seen any signs for a garage nearby, but nothing came to mind. The rain was relentless, pounding against the roof of the truck. After a few more minutes, I saw a small, dimly lit building up ahead. It looked more like a shed than a garage. He pulled up in front of it and got out, coming around to my side. "Here we are," he said, opening my door. I stepped out, the rain hitting me again. The place looked deserted. No lights on inside, no other cars. "This is your garage?" I asked, doubt creeping into my voice. "Yeah," he said. "Come on in, I'll show you." Every instinct told me to run, but where would I go? I followed him inside. The inside was even worse. It was cluttered with old parts and tools, and there was a faint smell of oil and something else I couldn't identify. "Wait here," he said, disappearing into another room. I stood there, my heart pounding. I looked around for anything I could use as a weapon, just in case. I spotted a rusty wrench on a workbench and grabbed it, holding it behind my back. He came back a moment later, a strange smile on his face. "Why don't you sit down? This might take a while." I shook my head. "I think I'll stand." He stepped closer, and I could see the glint in his eyes. "You're not going anywhere, you know that, right?" Panic surged through me. I swung the wrench, hitting him on the shoulder. He shouted in pain, but it only seemed to make him angrier. He lunged at me, and I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of boxes. I ran for the door, wrench still in hand. He was right behind me, but I managed to get outside. The rain was blinding, but I kept running. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away from him. I heard him shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran down the road, my lungs burning and my legs aching. The rain was so heavy, it felt like I was running through a wall of water. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw headlights coming toward me. I waved my arms frantically, and the car slowed down. It was another tow truck, but this one had a logo on the side and looked legitimate. The driver rolled down the window. "You okay, buddy?" I was gasping for breath. "Help, someone's after me." He looked past me and saw the other man coming. He quickly got out and pulled me into his truck. "Stay down," he said, getting back behind the wheel. He locked the doors and drove off, the other man disappearing into the storm behind us. I didn't relax until we were miles away. The driver called the police, and they met us at a nearby station. I told them everything, and they went out to find the man who had tried to trap me. I never found out what happened to him. The police said the place he took me to was abandoned, and there was no sign of him when they arrived. But I knew I'd never forget that night, and I'd never take help from a stranger so easily again. The rain started just after we arrived at the cabin. Jenny, Alex, Rachel, and I had planned this weekend getaway for months. It was supposed to be a break from our hectic lives, just a couple of days to relax, play games, and catch up. The cabin was cozy, tucked away in the woods, perfect for what we needed. By nightfall, the storm had turned fierce. The wind howled, and the rain hammered the windows. We had a fire going in the fireplace, the only light in the room since the power had gone out. We huddled around, telling stories and laughing, trying to ignore the weather outside. Around 10 p.m., there was a knock on the door. It was so unexpected that we all jumped. I exchanged a look with Jenny, then got up to see who it could be. Through the peephole, I saw a man, soaking wet, shivering. He looked desperate. I cracked the door open, keeping the chain on. "Can I help you?" "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice shaking. "My car broke down a mile back. Can I come in and use your phone to call for help?" My gut told me something was off. "There's no phone service up here, and the power's out." His eyes darted around, like he was thinking. "Please, I just need to get out of the rain." Jenny came up behind me. "Maybe we should let him in, just for a bit." Reluctantly, I unchained the door. The man stepped in, water pooling on the floor around him. He looked around the cabin, and I noticed his eyes lingered on each of us a bit too long. "Thank you," he said. "I'm Tom." We introduced ourselves, though I felt uneasy. He sat by the fire, warming his hands. "It's really coming down out there," he said, trying to make small talk. "Yeah," Alex replied. "We're lucky we got here before it started." Tom nodded, then looked at me. "You sure there's no phone service? Not even a landline?" "No, nothing," I said. "We're pretty isolated here." Rachel, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "What happened to your car?" Tom hesitated, then said, "Hit something in the road, maybe a branch. Engine just died." Rachel looked at me, her eyebrows raised. I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. His story didn't add up. I walked through a storm to a cabin with no guarantee of help. I decided to test him. "We have a radio in the back. Maybe you can get a signal and call for help." Tom's face twitched, but he smiled. "That would be great, thanks." I led him to the back room, where we kept the old radio. As he fiddled with it, I noticed something sticking out of his coat pocket. It looked like a piece of paper, but I couldn't make out what it was. "Weird that your car died so suddenly," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Where are you heading?" "Just passing through," he replied, not looking up from the radio. His answers were too vague. I needed to talk to the others without him hearing. "Let me check on the others," I said, and quickly left the room. Back in the living room, I whispered to Jenny, Alex, and Rachel. "Something's wrong. His story doesn't add up." Rachel nodded. "I thought the same thing. He seems too calm. What do we do?" Alex asked, glancing nervously at the hallway. "We need to stay together," I said, "and watch him closely." Tom came back out, shaking his head. "No luck with the radio. Looks like I'm stuck here until the storm passes." We nodded, trying to act natural. But the tension was thick. We played a game of cards, Tom joining in. Every time he looked away, we exchanged worried glances. Something about him was definitely off. After a while, Tom excused himself to use the bathroom. As soon as he was out of earshot, Rachel leaned in. "We need to search his stuff. See if we can find anything." "Agreed," I said. "Alex, keep an eye on him." Rachel and I slipped into the back room. We found his coat and searched the pockets. There was a piece of paper, folded up. When we opened it, our blood ran cold. It was a map of the area, with our cabin circled in red. There were notes scribbled on it, timing, how many people, the layout of the cabin. "This isn't random," Rachel whispered. "He planned this." We heard footsteps and quickly put the paper back. Tom reappeared, looking at us suspiciously. "What are you doing?" Just checking something, I said, trying to stay calm. Tom's smile didn't reach his eyes. Everything okay? Yeah, fine, I replied, moving past him. We should get back to the others. Back in the living room, I discreetly showed Jenny and Alex the map. Their faces went pale. We knew we had to act fast. Tom was dangerous, and we were trapped with him. We needed a plan. I whispered to Jenny and Alex, telling them to follow my lead. Rachel distracted Tom with questions while we gathered supplies, anything we could use as weapons. A heavy flashlight, a kitchen knife, a fireplace poker. Tom was getting impatient. What's taking so long? He asked, eyes narrowing. Just a minute, I said, trying to sound casual. Rachel wanted to show you something. Tom followed Rachel to the back room, and we seized the moment. We barricaded the front door and windows, then hid near the hallway, weapons in hand. When Tom realized Rachel had tricked him, he stormed back out, furious. What's going on here? He demanded, his face twisted with rage. Get out of our cabin, I said, stepping forward with the flashlight raised. Tom's eyes darted to the door, then back at us. You don't understand. I need this place. No, you need to leave, Jenny said, holding the knife steady. Tom lunged at us, but we were ready. Alex swung the poker, catching him in the side. He stumbled, and Jenny jabbed the knife forward, not enough to injure him seriously, but enough to make him back off. Get out. I shouted again. Tom looked at us, breathing hard. Then he turned and bolted for the back door. We didn't chase him, just locked it behind him and collapsed in relief. We spent the rest of the night on high alert, but Tom didn't come back. When morning finally came, the storm had passed. We packed up quickly and left the cabin, reporting the incident to the local authorities as soon as we got to town. They found Tom's abandoned car, but no sign of him. It was clear he had been planning something bad, and we were lucky to have escaped unharmed. That weekend getaway turned into a nightmare, one we wouldn't forget. I decided to spend a few days at my family's beach house. I wanted some time alone, away from the chaos of the city. The weather forecast said there'd be a storm, but I didn't mind. I liked the sound of rain and waves crashing. It felt peaceful. The first night, the wind started picking up. By the time I went to bed, the rain was hitting the windows hard. I could hear the ocean roaring. I pulled the covers up and tried to sleep, but the storm kept me awake. Around midnight, I heard a loud crash outside. I got up and looked out the window. Through the sheets of rain, I saw a small boat had washed ashore. 2 men were stumbling out of it. They looked soaked and desperate. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to help, but another part was cautious. I decided to go downstairs and see what was happening. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the back door. The wind almost knocked me over. The men saw my light and started waving. Please, we need help, one of them shouted. I couldn't hear him well over the storm, but his voice sounded desperate. I waved them over. They ran to the house, shivering and soaked. I let them in and shut the door behind them. Thank you, one of them said, catching his breath. Our boat got caught in the storm. Do you have a phone we can use? The other man asked. No service out here, I said. But you can dry off and warm up inside. They nodded, looking around the house. Something about their gaze made me uneasy, but I tried to shake it off. I got them some towels and let them dry off by the fireplace. As they warmed up, I asked them what happened. We were out fishing, the first man said. Got caught in the storm and couldn't make it back. Yeah, the other man added, then our boat hit something and started sinking. We barely made it to shore. I nodded, but something felt off. Their story seemed too simple. They were looking around the house too much, like they were casing the place. What's your name? I asked, trying to keep things calm. I'm Mike, and this is Jeff, the first man said. I'm Chris, I replied. You're welcome to stay until the storm passes. They thanked me again, but the tension was thick. I offered them some dry clothes and food. As they changed, I noticed they both had tattoos that looked like prison ink. My unease grew. We sat in the living room, the storm raging outside. I tried to make small talk, but they were evasive. They kept glancing at each other, like they were silently communicating. I excused myself to go to the bathroom. I needed to think. Something wasn't right. I decided to call the local police station. There was a landline in the house, and I hoped it still worked. As I dialed, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Mike standing in the doorway, watching me. What are you doing? He asked, his tone cold. Just checking on something, I lied, hanging up the phone. Mike's eyes narrowed. You're not calling anyone, are you? No, I said quickly. Just checking if the phone works. He didn't look convinced, but stepped back. I knew I had to be careful. I went back to the living room, trying to act normal. Jeff was looking through the kitchen cabinets. Got any booze? He asked. No, sorry, I said. Just water and soda. He grunted, clearly annoyed. The atmosphere was getting worse. I could feel their hostility growing. The storm outside was relentless. It felt like it would never end. I needed to find a way to get these guys out of my house. I decided to try and reason with them. Look, I said, trying to sound calm. You're welcome to stay until the storm passes, but I need to know you're not going to cause any trouble. Mike and Jeff exchanged glances again. Mike smirked. We're not here to cause trouble. Just needed a place to stay. His tone was sarcastic, almost mocking. I didn't believe him. I needed a plan. I decided to try and get them to leave voluntarily. If you're not comfortable here, there's a small town a few miles down the road, I said. They might have a place you can stay. Jeff laughed. You really think we're going out in this storm? I felt trapped. The tension was thick, and I knew I had to be careful. I decided to try and keep them distracted until the storm passed. I suggested we play a game to pass the time. They agreed, but their interest seemed fake. As we played, I kept thinking about how to get out of this situation. I needed to stay alert and ready to act if things went south. The hours dragged on, the storm showing no signs of letting up. Suddenly, Mike stood up. I need to check something outside. I felt a surge of panic. What do you need to check? Just something with the boat, he said, heading for the door. I knew I couldn't let him go alone. I'll come with you, I said. He turned, a cold look in his eyes. No need. Stay here. I followed him anyway, grabbing my flashlight. As we stepped outside, the wind almost knocked us over. I could barely see through the rain, but I followed Mike to the boat. When we reached it, he turned to me. Why are you really out here? I told you, I wanted to help, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He stepped closer, his expression menacing. I don't believe you. Before I could react, he lunged at me. I dodged, the flashlight slipping from my hand. We grappled in the mud, the storm raging around us. I managed to push him off and ran back to the house, slamming the door behind me. Jeff was waiting inside, his expression cold. "Where's Mike?" "He's staying with the boat," I lied, trying to catch my breath. Jeff didn't look convinced. "You're hiding something." I needed to act fast. "We should wait for the storm to pass, then you can both leave." Jeff's eyes narrowed. "We're not going anywhere." I knew I had to get help. I moved towards the phone, but Jeff blocked my way. "You're not calling anyone," he said, his voice low and threatening. I felt a surge of fear. These men were dangerous, and I was trapped. I needed a plan. I decided to try and lure Jeff outside, away from the phone. "I think there's something wrong with the boat," I said, trying to sound convincing. "Mike might need help." Jeff hesitated, then nodded. "Let's go." I followed him outside, my heart pounding. As we neared the boat, I saw Mike struggling in the mud, trying to get up. Jeff rushed to help him, and I took my chance. I ran back to the house, grabbed the phone, and dialed the local police. My hands were shaking, but I managed to explain the situation. They said they'd send someone right away. I locked the doors and waited, my heart racing. I knew it was only a matter of time before Mike and Jeff came back. I needed to stay hidden until help arrived. I heard footsteps on the porch, followed by banging on the door. "Let us in," Mike shouted. I stayed silent, hiding in a closet. The banging grew louder, more desperate. I heard the sound of glass breaking and knew they were inside. I held my breath, trying to stay calm. The minutes felt like hours. I prayed the police would arrive soon. Suddenly, I heard sirens in the distance. Mike and Jeff stopped searching, their footsteps growing frantic. They knew their time was up. The police arrived, bursting through the door. They found me hiding and quickly apprehended Mike and Jeff. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The officers took my statement and assured me I was safe. Mike and Jeff were taken into custody, their plans thwarted. I spent the rest of the night at the police station, grateful to be alive. The storm hit harder than I expected. I was driving back home after a weekend visit to my parents, and the rain started coming down in sheets. It was almost impossible to see the road. My wipers were going at full speed, but it didn't help much. The wind was howling, making my car sway. I saw a sign for a gas station a few miles ahead and decided to pull over. I needed a break and some shelter until the storm eased up. When I got to the gas station, it looked old and run down. The lights inside were flickering, and the place seemed deserted. I hesitated for a moment but decided to go in. I didn't have much of a choice with the storm raging outside. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. The inside was just as old and worn as the outside. Shelves were half empty, and the air smelled musty. A man stood behind the counter. He looked to be in his 60s, with gray hair and a friendly smile. "Evening, miss." "Quite a storm out there," he said. "Yeah, it's really bad." "I just need to wait it out for a bit," I replied. "Of course, take your time." "Name's Hank, by the way," he said. "Sarah," I said, forcing a smile. I wandered around the store, pretending to look at the snacks and drinks. I felt uneasy, but I couldn't pinpoint why. "Where are you headed, Sarah?" Hank asked, breaking the silence. "Just on my way home from visiting family," I said. He nodded, his smile never fading. "Not many folks come through here these days." Storm's a real doozy. I nodded and went to the back of the store to find a bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, and the light inside was dim. I pushed the door open and froze. There were chains bolted to the wall, with cuffs hanging from them. The sight made my stomach churn. I backed out slowly, trying not to make any noise. When I got back to the front, Hank was still smiling, but there was something unsettling about it now. "Everything all right?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Yeah, just couldn't find the bathroom," I lied. "Right over there," he said, pointing to the door I had just come from. I nodded, pretending I didn't see anything. "Thanks, I'll just wait here until the storm passes." His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sure thing." I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. I needed to get out of there. I walked back to the front door, but Hank suddenly moved from behind the counter and blocked my path. "Leaving already?" "Storm's still pretty bad," he said, his tone no longer friendly. I just remembered I have somewhere to be," I stammered. He stepped closer, and I could see a glint of something dangerous in his eyes. "I insist you stay. It's not safe out there." I backed away, my heart pounding. "I really should go." Hank grabbed my arm, his grip strong and painful. I said, "It's not safe." Panic surged through me. I twisted my arm, trying to break free, but his grip tightened. "Let me go!" I shouted. "No need to shout," he said calmly, dragging me towards the back of the store. I struggled, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. He was too strong. He shoved me into a small room and locked the door behind me. The room was dark, with only a small window letting in some light. I banged on the door, shouting for help, but the storm drowned out my cries. I heard Hank's footsteps fading away. I looked around the room, trying to find something, anything to use as a weapon. My eyes fell on an old, rusty pipe lying in the corner. I grabbed it and waited, my heart pounding. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, I heard the door creak open. Hank stepped in, and I swung the pipe with all my strength. It connected with his head, and he stumbled back, cursing. I took my chance and ran. I burst out of the room and headed for the front door. Hank was right behind me, blood trickling down his face. I reached the door and threw it open, the wind and rain hitting me like a wall. I ran to my car, fumbling with my keys. Hank was getting closer, his face twisted with rage. I got the door open and jumped in, locking it behind me. I started the car and floored it, the tires spinning in the mud. Hank banged on the window, but I didn't stop. I drove as fast as I could, the storm making it hard to see. I didn't stop until I reached a town several miles away. I pulled into a well-lit gas station and called the police. They found Hank and arrested him. Turns out, he had a history of kidnapping and had been hiding out at that old gas station for years. I was lucky to get away. I was working the night shift at the mountain lodge, just like any other night. It was quiet and the snow was falling outside, covering everything in a thick, white blanket. The lodge was almost empty, with only a few guests who had turned in early. I was at the front desk, doing some paperwork, when I heard a faint knocking on the door. I looked up, a bit surprised. We didn't usually get visitors this late, especially in this weather. I walked over to the door and saw a man standing outside. He was dressed in a heavy coat and looked completely lost. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with fear. I hesitated for a moment but decided to open the door. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, letting him in. He nodded, shivering. I got lost in the woods. My car broke down a few miles back, and I've been wandering around for hours. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. The weather was brutal, and being stuck out there could be dangerous. Come in, warm up. Do you need anything? Coffee, maybe? Yes, please, he said, his voice shaky. I led him to the small lounge area and went to make some coffee. When I returned, he was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. I handed him the cup, and he took it with trembling hands. Thank you, he said, taking a sip. I'm Kevin, by the way. Nice to meet you, Kevin. I'm Mike, I replied. What were you doing out there so late? He glanced up at me, his eyes dark and intense. I was visiting a friend, but I got lost on my way back. Then my car broke down, and, well, here I am. There was something off about his story, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I decided to let it go for now. Well, you're safe here. We can call a tow truck in the morning. He nodded, but his gaze didn't leave the fire. I went back to the front desk, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my stomach. I kept an eye on Kevin as he warmed up by the fire. After a while, he got up and started pacing around the lounge. His movements were jerky, almost frantic. I watched him, trying to figure out what was going on. Suddenly, he stopped and looked straight at me. Do you have a phone I can use? He asked, his voice tense. Sure, there's one right here, I said, pointing to the phone on the desk. He walked over and picked up the receiver, but then he just stood there, staring at it. I could see his hands shaking. Is everything all right? I asked, growing more concerned. He slammed the receiver down and backed away, his eyes wild. No, nothing is all right. They're after me. My heart started pounding. Who's after you? He didn't answer. Instead, he started mumbling to himself, his words too low for me to understand. I took a step back, trying to figure out what to do. I needed to keep him calm and find out what was going on. Kevin, you need to calm down. You're safe here. No one is going to hurt you, I said, trying to sound soothing. He shook his head violently. You don't understand. They're everywhere. They're coming for me. I glanced around, feeling the panic rise in my chest. There was no one else here, just us. I needed to get him to calm down before things got out of hand. Listen, let's sit down and talk about this. Maybe I can help. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anger. You can't help me. No one can. Before I could react, he lunged at me, knocking me to the floor. I struggled to get free, but he was surprisingly strong. Get off me. I shouted, trying to push him away. He pinned me down, his face inches from mine. They're coming for you too, he whispered, his breath hot and stale. I finally managed to shove him off and scrambled to my feet. He was on the floor, breathing heavily. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. I need help. There's a man here, and he's out of control, I said, my voice trembling. The operator assured me that help was on the way. I kept my distance from Kevin, watching him carefully. He was muttering to himself again, his eyes darting around the room. I could hear the sound of sirens in the distance, and relief washed over me. When the police arrived, Kevin didn't resist. They took him away, still mumbling about people coming after him. I gave my statement to the officers, explaining what had happened. They assured me that he would get the help he needed. After they left, I sat down, trying to process what had just happened. The lodge was quiet again, the only sound the crackling of the fire. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. I knew I would never forget that night and the look in Kevin's eyes. I was driving through the storm, the rain pounding against the windshield, making it hard to see. The wipers were working overtime, but visibility was still terrible. I was on my way to visit my parents for the weekend, but the weather had other plans. After hours of fighting the elements, I decided to pull over and find a place to stay for the night. I spotted a small, rundown motel on the side of the road. The neon sign flickered, but it was a beacon of hope in the middle of the storm. I pulled into the parking lot, relieved to be off the road. The lot was nearly empty, with just a couple of other cars parked haphazardly. I grabbed my bag and hurried inside, the rain soaking me to the bone in the few steps it took to reach the door. The lobby was dimly lit, with old, worn-out furniture and a musty smell. The man behind the counter looked up as I entered, a broad smile spreading across his face. "Welcome. Need a room for the night?" he asked, his voice overly cheerful for the late hour. "Yes, please," I replied, shivering from the cold and the wet clothes clinging to my skin. "You're in luck, we have plenty of vacancies." "I'll get you set up in one of our best rooms," he said, grabbing a key from the wall behind him. He handed me the key with a number on it and pointed me down the hallway. "Room 12, just down that way. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call the front desk." I thanked him and made my way to the room, feeling a bit uneasy but too tired to care. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small but clean, with a bed, a dresser, and a small TV mounted on the wall. I dropped my bag on the bed and went into the bathroom to change out of my wet clothes. After changing into something dry, I felt a bit better. I turned on the TV, hoping to find some news about the storm, but the reception was terrible. The screen flickered with static, and I could barely make out any images. Frustrated, I turned it off and decided to get some sleep. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up, trying to ignore the feeling of unease that had settled in my stomach. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a faint clicking sound. It was so quiet that I almost thought I imagined it, but then it came again. I sat up, listening intently. The sound was coming from the corner of the room. I got out of bed and walked over to the dresser, where the sound seemed to be coming from. I opened the drawers, but they were empty. I was about to give up when I noticed something strange behind the TV. There was a small, black device mounted on the wall, almost hidden from view. I reached up and pulled it off, realizing it was a camera. My heart started pounding as I looked around the room, spotting another camera in the corner near the ceiling. Panic set in as I realized I was being watched. I quickly grabbed my bag and headed for the door, but as I reached for the handle, it turned from the other side. The manager stood there, his smile now gone, replaced with a look of cold calculation. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. I forced a smile, trying to hide my fear. "Actually, I was just about to come to the front desk. I think there's a problem with the room." He stepped inside, blocking the door. "What kind of problem?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. I took a step back, my mind racing. I found something. I think there's a camera in here." His expression didn't change. "Oh, that. It's just for security, you know, to make sure our guests are safe." I didn't believe him for a second. "I'd like to check out, please. I don't feel comfortable staying here." He shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid I can't let you leave. Not until the storm passes." I knew I had to get out of there. I glanced around the room, looking for something to use as a weapon. My eyes landed on the lamp on the nightstand. Without thinking, I grabbed it and swung it at him. The lamp shattered against his head, and he stumbled back, giving me just enough time to slip past him and run down the hallway. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I burst through the front door and ran to my car, fumbling with the keys in my panic. I finally got the door open and jumped in, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking as I started the engine and sped out of the parking lot, the rain still pouring down. I drove for miles, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from that motel. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. I couldn't believe I had been so close to danger. Eventually, I found another motel, one that looked much safer, and checked in. That night, I barely slept, the fear and adrenaline keeping me on edge. The next morning, I reported the incident to the police, but I never heard back about what happened to the manager. I learned to trust my instincts that night, and I never let my guard down again. The storm hit us hard about an hour into the ferry ride. The sky turned dark, and the waves started tossing the boat around like a toy. I was on the upper deck, trying to keep my balance while watching the water crash against the sides. It was supposed to be a routine trip across the bay, but this storm came out of nowhere. I decided to go inside and find a seat. The cabin was crowded with people trying to escape the weather. I found an empty spot near the back and sat down, wiping the rain off my face. The air was thick with the smell of wet clothes and anxiety. Everyone was nervous, and the storm wasn't helping. I noticed a man sitting across from me. He was wearing a dark coat and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Something about him seemed off. He kept glancing around, fidgeting with a small black bag on his lap. Every few minutes, he'd look at his watch and then back at the bag. It made me uneasy. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid because of the storm. But I couldn't stop watching him. He looked around again, and this time our eyes met. He quickly looked away, stuffing the bag under his seat. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I got up and moved closer, pretending to stretch my legs. From my new spot, I could see the bag better. It was partially open, and I caught a glimpse of wires and a small device inside. My heart started pounding. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I decided to find a crew member. I walked towards the front of the cabin, trying to act casual. I spotted a crew member near the entrance, talking to a couple of passengers. I waited until he was alone, then approached him. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low. "I need to talk to you. It's important." He looked at me, eyebrows raised. "What's the matter?" "There's a man back there," I said, nodding towards the back of the cabin. "He has a bag with some kind of device in it. It looks dangerous." The crew member's expression changed. He glanced towards the back, then back at me. "Stay here," he said. "I'll take care of it." He walked away quickly, and I watched as he approached the man. The man saw him coming and grabbed the bag, standing up. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the man was shaking his head, trying to walk away. The crew member blocked his path, and that's when the man shoved him and started running. Panic erupted in the cabin. People were screaming and trying to get out of the way. I followed the man, pushing through the crowd. He ran down a narrow corridor, heading towards the lower deck. I didn't know what I was doing, but I couldn't let him get away. I caught up to him just as he reached the stairs. He turned and saw me, his eyes wide with fear and anger. He reached into the bag, and I saw the glint of a knife. I backed up, holding my hands up. "Stay back," he said, his voice shaking. Just stay back." I didn't move. He turned and ran down the stairs, and I followed at a distance. The lower deck was mostly empty, and the sound of the storm was louder down here. I saw him disappear into a storage room, and I knew I had to act fast. I looked around and saw a fire extinguisher on the wall. I grabbed it and crept towards the storage room. I could hear him inside, rummaging through the bag. I took a deep breath and swung the door open, spraying the extinguisher at him. He shouted and dropped the bag, trying to shield himself. I charged at him, hitting him with the extinguisher. He fell to the ground, and I grabbed the bag, running out of the room. I didn't stop until I reached the upper deck, where I found the crew member I had talked to earlier. He took the bag from me and called for backup. Within minutes, more crew members arrived and restrained the man. They searched the bag and found a homemade explosive device. The police were called, and they took the man into custody when we reached the shore. The rest of the trip was a blur. I was shaken, but relieved that it was over. The crew thanked me for my help, and I was given a voucher for a free trip as a reward. But I knew I wouldn't be taking any more ferries for a long time. The memory of that man's eyes, the fear and anger in them, still haunts me. I'm just glad I trusted my instincts and acted before it was too late. I was stuck at the train station during one of the worst storms I had ever seen. The rain was pounding against the windows, and the wind howled like a wild animal. I had missed my train home, and the next one wasn't due for hours. The station was almost empty, just me and a few other unlucky souls stranded by the weather. I sat on a cold, metal bench, watching the rain. The lights flickered occasionally, making the shadows in the corners dance. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and tried to get comfortable, but the bench was hard, and the air was damp and chilly. After a while, I noticed a man walking towards me. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark uniform. I assumed he was a security guard, though I hadn't seen him before. He had a badge clipped to his chest and a flashlight in his hand. "Evening," he said, his voice deep and slightly raspy. "You waiting for the next train?" "Yeah," I replied. "Got stuck here because of the storm." "Bad one, isn't it?" He glanced at the windows, the rain still hammering down. "Name's Carl. I'm the night security here." "I'm Laura," I said. "Nice to meet you." He nodded and sat down on the bench across from me. His presence was a bit unsettling, but I figured he was just doing his job. We sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the storm. "Not many people here tonight," he said finally, looking around the empty station. "Most folks cleared out before it got this bad." "Yeah, it's pretty deserted," I agreed. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "So, Laura, where you headed?" "Home," I said. "Just trying to get home." He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. "You know, it's not safe for a young woman to be alone in a place like this. Lots of strange people around." I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the way he said it made me uneasy. "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just waiting for my train." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if you need anything, I'll be around." He stood up and walked away, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. I watched him disappear into the shadows, feeling a sense of relief once he was gone. But the relief didn't last long. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. I tried to distract myself by reading a book, but I couldn't focus. Every time the lights flickered, I glanced around, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me. The minutes dragged on, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to stretch my legs. I walked down the platform, trying to shake off the unease. As I passed a row of lockers, I heard a noise behind me. I turned quickly, but no one was there. Just the empty station and the sound of the storm. I told myself I was being paranoid. There was no reason to be scared. But as I turned to head back to my bench, I saw him again. Carl, standing at the far end of the platform, watching me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were dark and intense. I forced a smile and nodded at him, hoping to appear calm. He didn't respond, just kept staring. I hurried back to my seat, my heart pounding in my chest. Something wasn't right. I needed to find a way out of there, but with the storm raging outside, I had nowhere to go. I decided to go to the restroom, hoping to buy some time and gather my thoughts. The restroom was down a dimly lit hallway, and as I walked, I felt like I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing. Inside the restroom, I splashed some water on my face and took a deep breath. I needed to stay calm and think clearly. But when I stepped out, Carl was there, leaning against the wall. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Yeah, just needed a break," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a step closer, and I could see the cold glint in his eyes. "You know, the storm's getting worse. Might be a good idea to find somewhere safer to wait." "I'm fine here," I insisted, backing away. His smile faded, replaced by a hard, menacing look. "I don't think you understand. It's not safe here." My heart was racing now. I needed to get away from him. "I'll take my chances," I said, turning to leave. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. "I'm not giving you a choice," he growled. I yanked my arm free and ran, my footsteps echoing in the empty station. I could hear him behind me, his boots pounding on the floor. I didn't know where to go, but I had to get away. I darted down a hallway and into a storage room, slamming the door shut behind me. I looked around, my eyes searching for something to block the door. I spotted a heavy shelf and pushed it against the door, my hands shaking. I could hear Carl outside, trying the handle and then pounding on the door. "Let me in, Laura," he shouted. "You're only making this harder on yourself." I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I needed to find a way to call for help. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. The storm had knocked out the cell towers. I was trapped. I heard a crash outside and realized he was trying to break down the door. I had to think fast. I looked around the room and spotted a small window near the ceiling. It was a tight fit, but it was my only chance. I climbed up on a stack of boxes and pushed the window open. The rain and wind hit me immediately, but I didn't care. I squeezed through the window, cutting my hands on the glass, and dropped down onto the wet pavement outside. I could hear Carl shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran through the storm, my clothes soaked and my heart pounding. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away from him. I finally saw the lights of a nearby building and ran towards it. It was a small diner, and the sight of it filled me with relief. I burst through the door, gasping for breath. The few people inside turned to look at me, their faces filled with concern. "Help," I managed to say. "There's a man. He's after me." The staff quickly called the police, and they arrived within minutes. I told them everything, and they assured me I was safe now. They found Carl still trying to break into the storage room, and he was arrested. The ordeal left me shaken, but I was grateful to be alive. I never thought a simple trip could turn into a nightmare, but it did. I'll never forget the look in Carl's eyes, the fear and anger. It's something that will haunt me forever. I was working the night shift at the hospital, just like any other night. The storm outside was raging, the rain beating against the windows, and the wind howling like a banshee. It was the kind of storm that made you grateful to be indoors, safe and dry. But then, everything changed. A patient was brought in by the storm. They said he had been found by the side of the road, disoriented and injured. They didn't know who he was or where he came from. All they knew was that he needed help. I went to check on him, expecting to find just another patient in need of care. But when I entered his room, something felt off. He was lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling with vacant eyes. His breathing was shallow and ragged, and there was a wildness in his gaze that made me uneasy. I approached him cautiously, trying to assess his condition. But as soon as I got close, he lashed out, grabbing me by the throat with surprising strength. His eyes were filled with rage, and I could see the madness swirling behind them. I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. He pushed me against the wall, his grip tightening around my neck. I could feel the air being squeezed out of my lungs, and panic surged through me. I knew I had to do something, anything, to survive. With all the strength I could muster, I fought back, kicking and punching at him with all my might. Eventually, I managed to break free, gasping for air as I stumbled away from him. But he wasn't done yet. He lunged at me again, his fists flying, and I dodged out of the way just in time. Adrenaline surged through me as I fought to defend myself, knowing that my life depended on it. I tried to reason with him, to calm him down, but he was beyond reason. His eyes were filled with madness, and he seemed to be driven by some unseen force. All he wanted was to hurt me, to destroy me. I knew I had to get help, but the storm outside had knocked out the power, and the hospital was in chaos. I was on my own, trapped with a violent patient who seemed intent on killing me. I backed away slowly, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. But he followed me, his movements relentless and predatory. I could see the hunger in his eyes, the thirst for blood. I knew I had to find a way out, to escape before it was too late. But everywhere I turned, he was there, blocking my path, cutting off my escape. I felt a surge of desperation as I realized that I was running out of options. I needed to think fast, to find a way to outsmart him, to outmaneuver him. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw it. A glimmer of light, shining through the darkness. It was a door, a way out. I made a break for it, sprinting towards the door with all the speed I could muster. He was right behind me, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. But I was faster. I reached the door and threw it open, stepping out into the storm. The rain lashed against my face, the wind whipped at my clothes, but I didn't care. I was free. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was far away from the hospital, far away from him. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. But I was alive. I had survived. And as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the storm rage on, I knew that I would never forget the terror of that night. The fear, the adrenaline, the desperate struggle for survival. It was a night I would never forget. And as long as I lived, I would never set foot in that hospital again. I was driving down a lonely country road, the rain pounding against the windshield and the wind howling outside. The storm was raging, and the visibility was poor. I could barely see a few feet in front of me, but I had to keep going. I was almost home, and I just wanted to get there safely. That's when I saw him, standing by the side of the road with his thumb out. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to his skin, and his face hidden beneath the hood of his jacket. He looked like he had been out in the storm for hours, and I couldn't just leave him there. I pulled over and rolled down the window, offering him a ride. He climbed into the car without a word, his eyes hidden in the shadows of his hood. I tried to make small talk, asking him where he was headed and if he was okay, but he didn't respond. He just sat there in silence, staring out the window as the rain beat against the glass. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off as nerves. I told myself that he was probably just tired and cold, and that's why he wasn't talking. But as we drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He started to fidget in his seat, shifting around uncomfortably as if he couldn't get comfortable. His breathing grew heavy, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead, but the atmosphere in the car had changed. It was thick with tension, like a storm brewing beneath the surface. And then, out of nowhere, he snapped. He started shouting, his voice rising in anger as he accused me of all sorts of things. He said I was trying to hurt him, that I was plotting against him, that I was out to get him. I tried to calm him down, to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept yelling, his words filled with venom and hatred. I felt a surge of panic as I realized that I was alone in the car with a complete stranger who was clearly unstable. I didn't know what to do, where to go, how to escape. I just kept driving, hoping that I could get away from him before things got any worse. But he wasn't done yet. He lunged at me, grabbing the steering wheel and jerking it to the side. The car swerved off the road, skidding across the wet pavement and crashing into a ditch. I screamed as the airbags deployed, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I tried to push him away, to fight him off, but he was too strong. He pinned me against the seat, his hands around my throat, squeezing the life out of me. I struggled to breathe, my vision blurring as darkness closed in around me. But then, just when I thought it was all over, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I kicked and thrashed, clawing at him with all the strength I had left. And finally, miraculously, he let go. I gasped for air, coughing and sputtering as I fought to regain my breath. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before he could hurt me again. I unbuckled my seatbelt and scrambled out of the car, running as fast as I could through the rain and the darkness. I didn't stop until I was far away from him, far away from the nightmare that had almost cost me my life. I collapsed on the ground, shaking and sobbing as the adrenaline wore off and the reality of what had just happened sunk in. I was alive, but I was shaken to my core. I knew I would never forget the terror of that night, the fear of being trapped in a car with a madman. I was staying at this old fishing cabin for a weekend getaway. It was supposed to be a relaxing time, just me and the sound of the rain on the roof. But then the storm hit, and everything changed. I was sitting by the fire, reading a book, when I heard it. A scream, loud and piercing, cutting through the sound of the rain. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again, closer this time. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside, trying to see through the darkness and the rain. And that's when I saw her, stumbling out of the trees, her clothes torn and her face covered in dirt. She was crying and shaking, her whole body trembling with fear. I ran over to her, asking her what happened, if she was okay. She told me she had escaped from a kidnapper, that he had been holding her captive in the woods. I didn't know what to do, how to help her. I was just a regular guy, not some kind of hero. But I knew I couldn't just leave her out there in the storm, alone and terrified. So I brought her inside the cabin, trying to calm her down and make her feel safe. I gave her some dry clothes and a blanket, trying to warm her up from the cold. As she sat there, trembling and sobbing, she told me her story. She said she had been out for a walk in the woods when a man had grabbed her from behind, dragging her into his car and driving off into the night. She said she had been trapped in his cabin for days, locked away in a dark room with no way out. I felt sick to my stomach, imagining what she must have gone through. I couldn't believe that something like that could happen, not out here in the middle of nowhere. But then again, I guess you never really know what people are capable of. I wanted to call the police to get her help right away. But then she begged me not to, saying that he would come looking for her, that he would never stop until he found her. I didn't know what to do, torn between wanting to help her and wanting to protect myself. And then, just as I was trying to figure out what to do next, I heard it. A car pulling up outside, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as I realized that he had found her, that he was here to take her back. I grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, a fireplace poker, and stood there in the darkness, waiting for him to come inside. I didn't know if I could take him on, if I could protect her from whatever he had planned. But then the car drove off again, disappearing into the night as quickly as it had come. I let out a sigh of relief, feeling the tension drain from my body as I realized that we were safe, at least for now. I stayed up all night, keeping watch over her as she slept, afraid that he would come back. But he never did. And when morning came, I drove her into town, to the nearest police station, where she could get the help she needed. I never found out what happened to her after that, if they caught the guy or if she ever got justice for what he did to her. But I like to think that she did, that she was able to move on with her life and leave the nightmare behind her. As for me, well, I never went back to that fishing cabin again. The memories were too painful, too haunting. But I'll never forget the terror of that night, the fear of not knowing if we would make it out alive. And I'll always be grateful that we did. Hi, my name's Thomas and I work as a forest ranger, and there's this one time that I'll never forget. It was during a storm, one of those really bad ones that comes out of nowhere and hits you like a freight train. I was out on patrol, trying to make sure that everyone was safe and that no one was out there in the woods getting themselves into trouble. But then the storm hit, and it hit hard. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind was howling like a banshee. I knew I had to get back to the station, to hunker down and ride out the storm until it passed. I made it back just in time, as the rain started to come down even harder. I locked up the station and hunkered down inside, trying to wait out the storm and hoping that no one would be stupid enough to be out there in weather like this. But then I heard it, a knock on the door. I thought I must have been hearing things at first, but then I heard it again, louder this time. I cautiously made my way over to the door, trying to see through the rain and the darkness. There was a man standing there, soaked to the bone and shivering from the cold. He claimed that he had been out hiking and had gotten lost in the storm. He said he was looking for shelter, somewhere to wait out the weather until he could find his way back to safety. I didn't know what to do at first, whether to let him in or to turn him away. But then I figured that he was just some poor guy who had gotten caught out in the storm, like so many others. So I opened the door and let him inside, trying to be a good Samaritan and help him out in his time of need. But as soon as he stepped inside, I knew that something wasn't right. There was something about him, something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. It was like he was sizing me up, like he was trying to figure out if I was a threat or not. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself that I was just being paranoid. But then he started asking me all sorts of strange questions, like how many people were out there in the woods, and if I had any weapons on me. It was like he was trying to gauge whether or not he could overpower me. I started to get really nervous, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that I might be in danger. I didn't know what to do, whether to try and kick him out or to try and placate him until the storm passed. But then he made his move, lunging at me with a knife in his hand. I barely had time to react, scrambling backwards and trying to defend myself as best as I could. It was like something out of a nightmare, like I was trapped in some kind of horror movie. I managed to grab hold of a chair and swing it at him, knocking him off balance and giving me enough time to make a run for it. I didn't stop running until I was miles away from the station, until I was sure that he couldn't follow me anymore. I called for help as soon as I could, telling them what had happened and begging them to come and get me. It felt like hours before they finally arrived, like I was trapped in some kind of endless nightmare. But eventually they found me, and they took me back to safety. I never found out what happened to that guy, whether they caught him or whether he managed to slip away into the night. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget that night for as long as I live. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and it's something that I hope I never have to experience again. I'm the keeper of a lighthouse, and let me tell you about the scariest night of my life. It was during a storm, one of those really bad ones that rattles the windows and shakes the whole building. I was up in the tower, doing my usual rounds and keeping an eye on the sea. That's when I saw it, a shipwrecked sailor clinging to a piece of driftwood, desperately trying to stay afloat in the churning waters. My heart went out to him, knowing that he was in serious trouble out there. So I did what any decent person would do. I let him in. I guided him up to the lighthouse, trying to be a good Samaritan and offer him shelter from the storm. But as soon as he stepped inside, I knew that something was wrong. There was something about him, something in his eyes that set off alarm bells in my head. He was hostile from the start, demanding food and shelter like he owned the place. I tried to reason with him, to tell him that I was just trying to help. But he wasn't having any of it, getting more aggressive by the minute. I knew I had to do something to protect myself and the lighthouse from this dangerous man. So I tried to reason with him, to calm him down and get him to see reason. But he wasn't interested in listening, too caught up in his own anger and frustration. That's when he made his move, lunging at me with a knife in his hand. I barely had time to react, dodging out of the way and trying to defend myself as best as I could. It was like something out of a nightmare, like I was trapped in some kind of horror movie. I managed to grab hold of a nearby lamp and swing it at him, knocking him off balance and giving me enough time to make a run for it. I didn't stop running until I was miles away from the lighthouse, until I was sure that he couldn't follow me anymore. I called for help as soon as I could, telling them what had happened and begging them to come and get me. It felt like hours before they finally arrived, like I was trapped in some kind of endless nightmare. But eventually they found me, and they took me back to safety. I never found out what happened to that sailor, whether they caught him or whether he managed to slip away into the night. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget that night for as long as I live. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and it's something that I hope I never have to experience again. I was in my apartment, alone, during a citywide blackout caused by a raging storm. The darkness was suffocating, enveloping everything in its thick embrace. The only sound was the howling wind outside, rattling the windows and sending shivers down my spine. Suddenly, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to break in. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze in terror, not knowing what to do. Panic surged through me as I realized I was completely vulnerable in the darkness. I had to think fast, to find a way to protect myself from whoever was trying to get inside. My mind raced with fear, trying to come up with a plan, but all I could think about was the impending danger. I groped around in the darkness, searching desperately for something, anything, that I could use as a weapon. My hands closed around a heavy lamp, and I clutched it tightly, ready to defend myself if the intruder managed to break through the door. The pounding on the door grew louder and more frantic, and I could hear the sound of splintering wood as they tried to force their way in. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt like I was going to be sick with fear. But then, suddenly, the pounding stopped, and there was nothing but silence. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. It was as if the intruder had vanished into thin air. I stood there in the darkness, trembling with fear, unsure of what to do next. Should I call the police? Should I try to find a way out of the apartment? I didn't know, and the uncertainty only made my fear worse. Then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the pounding started again, louder and more ferocious than before. My blood ran cold as I realized that whatever was on the other side of that door was not going to give up easily. I backed away from the door, clutching the lamp tightly in my trembling hands. I felt like a cornered animal, trapped and helpless in the face of impending danger. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard the sound of voices outside. Relief flooded through me as I realized that help had finally arrived. The police had come to rescue me from whatever nightmare I had found myself in. I rushed to the door, throwing it open and stumbling out into the hallway. The police were there, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. They quickly subdued the intruder, leading them away in handcuffs. I stood there in the hallway, shaking with relief, grateful to be alive. It was over, the nightmare was finally over, and I was safe once again. But the memory of that night would stay with me forever, a constant reminder of the terrifying darkness that lurks just beyond the edges of our everyday lives. I was working the night shift as a security guard at an abandoned amusement park. It was a lonely job, but it paid the bills. The park had been closed for years, but there were still occasional trespassers who thought it would be fun to explore the empty rides and attractions. That night, a storm was raging outside, the wind howling and the rain lashing against the windows of my small office. The sound of the storm was eerie, echoing through the empty corridors of the park like the ghostly laughter of long-dead children. I was making my rounds, checking the perimeter of the park to make sure no one had breached the fence, when I saw them. A group of figures huddled together near the entrance, their faces obscured by the hooded jackets they wore against the rain. I approached them cautiously, my hand resting on the nightstick at my belt. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound authoritative. "You're not supposed to be here. This place is off limits." The figures turned to face me, and I could see the glint of metal in their hands. My heart sank as I realized they were armed. I took a step back, my pulse racing with fear. "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for the radio on my belt. But before I could make the call, one of the figures lunged at me, swinging a metal pipe in a wide arc. I stumbled backward, barely dodging the blow, and felt a sharp pain as the pipe grazed my shoulder. Adrenaline surged through me as I realized I was in real danger. These people weren't just trespassers, they were dangerous criminals. I had to get out of there, fast. I turned and ran, sprinting through the empty corridors of the park, the sound of their footsteps echoing behind me. The storm outside was raging, the wind howling like a pack of hungry wolves, but I didn't dare stop to catch my breath. I ducked into a nearby building, hoping to find shelter from the storm and a place to hide from my pursuers. But as I looked around, I realized with horror that I had stumbled into the park's old haunted house attraction. The air was thick with dust and cobwebs, and the sound of creaking floorboards echoed through the darkness. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I realized I was completely alone, trapped in the abandoned building with no way out. I stumbled through the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest, searching desperately for a way to escape. But every door I tried was locked tight, and the windows were boarded up, leaving me completely cut off from the outside world. I could hear them getting closer, their footsteps growing louder and more menacing with each passing moment. I knew I had to find a way out, or I would be at their mercy. Suddenly, I saw a glimmer of light up ahead, a small crack in the wall that led to the outside. I rushed toward it, my heart racing with hope, and squeezed through the opening just as the sound of footsteps reached a fever pitch behind me. I stumbled out into the storm, the rain pelting against my face like icy needles. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car, and even then, I didn't dare to look back. I drove away from the abandoned amusement park as fast as I could, my heart still pounding in my chest.